What's up, Internet? You're tuning in to episode 67 of the Steam Deck podcast, Split Screen Games weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Peter Messi, joined as always by my very good friend and co host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy. Almost called you Steve, Pete. How are you? Are you doing good?
I'm doing good. I think we both have Steve on the mind
I've
because,
always got Steve on the mind.
of course, I always have him on the mind, right? One of my dearest friends, an absolute cutie pie. But of course, he unfortunately is missing the show this week due to some personal stuff. So if you are a member of our Discord, make sure you show him some love. And we have a big week this week, so it is unfortunate he will not be here to weigh in. But
Yeah, a
you and I have done our
tech-heavy week.
homework. We're ready to
We have.
go. You know,
I've really had to swat up. So the thing about Steve is that this is just stuff that he just knows and picks up, and like this stuff just rolls off for him. Whereas you and I had to like dedicate time to swatting up. We took half the show each. We went away. We had to do some reading. We had to do some research. I've written more than I've written
yeah. I
since
mean,
I stopped writing for a living.
to part the curtain, right? If you don't listen to our other shows, right? Like I usually take the responsibility to put those shows together. This is the one where I can kind of put my feet up, and Steve's like, I brought all the knowledge to the table. All you got to
Mhm.
do is walk us through it, right? And it's easy, right? But yeah, to your point, this week we went and did our homework, and we have two court cases that have been dropped in
Yeah.
Valve's lap that we've got to talk about this week. The first is going to be, well, I guess one's not a Valve court case, but it's related to the OLED Steam Deck, right? We've
Yes,
got
yes, it is.
BOE versus Samsung, and we're going to talk all about that and why those two screen manufacturers are going at it and what it means for you as an OLED Steam Deck owner, or maybe someone who's thinking about picking one up. And then after that, we're going to have to jump into the conversation around what is going on with the Godfather himself, Gabe Newell, being forced to come back to the
Okay then.
United States as part of a class action lawsuit against Valve, being started by um, Wolfire Games, who's an independent studio that is looking to take a swing at Valve for the way that they handle the PC games marketplace. So lots to talk about this week, and
Yeah.
it's definitely going to be a juicy one. We're gonna start things off with the Samsung and BOE of it all because that
Yes.
that story's hot. We obviously, have the OLED Steam Deck on the mind, and I think something that a lot of people have been talking about in the last, week and change, since they've started getting their hands on those OLED Steam Decks are dead pixels, and
Mhm.
that depending on if you have a BOE screen or a Samsung screen on your device, the amount of dead pixels that you might be experiencing.
So, yeah, this kind of reminds me of back in the day, people would get their 3DS, their new 3DSs, and, you either got lucky and you got one type of screen or you got another type of screen, and then people were, like, ravenously hoping to try and get this one type of screen. It's not something I ever really understood, and, this time again, it sort of had to be explained to me. I put this was sort of first brought to my attention by Team Linux 01 in the Discord. Um, he was saying about when he first got his deck that there was sort of like edging on
Yeah, on the
to like
sides
the
of the
text and
screen.
stuff on the sort of bits of the screen. There was like each pixel had like a magenta side and a green side, and he would sort of showing us pictures and stuff. And it's not something I had really noticed. But then sort of lo and behold, on Reddit, people were sort of coming in droves to say, "Oh, I've got this," or "I've noticed this," and it's actually been sort of picked up, and there's actually been quite a lot of chatter. So basically, the Steam Deck OLED has come out, and there's two different displays you could possibly have. You can either have the BOE OLED screen, or you can have the Samsung OLED screen. Um, in theory, these two should sort of function exactly the same, but I think people are sort of noticing that there are some issues with the BOE screens that the Samsung screens aren't having. Not just the dead pixels that you mentioned earlier, Pete, which does seem to be. We'll touch on that a bit later about why that seems to be more of an issue for some people than others. Um, but yeah, it's just this edging of the screen, and I'm just going to read here from an article from Dexerto that's been put together by Joel Loynes. Um, so he writes here: subpixels in displays are effectively gaps that have been plugged in by another color. This allows manufacturers to increase the pixel density and create a high resolution display. OLED also stretches out or shrinks its different colors as these panels can lose their vibrancy as time goes on. So basically, um, yeah, that there's sort of the pixels and then the subpixels that sort of allows you to have a lot more going on the screen. But some users are reporting a green fringe around certain on-screen elements like text. I think a lot of it is white text, where you can sort of see the edge where it's so white you can
Right,
see
and
colors on the edge.
we talked briefly
Um,
about that last week as well, and I think that was
yes,
what Team Linux had initially brought up, right? And I remember
yes, yes.
Steve, asking me if I could see it on mine, and I was, not able to catch it.
No, yeah, I do think it's one of those things that you know if
Luck
you're
of the draw.
sensitive to it, yeah, but also like it could be like Team Linux was saying that he's sensitive to these sorts of things. He
Sure.
notices these things, and there are some things as well like the power going through the screen sometimes can make like a light flicker that some people don't notice, some people do. But yeah, Joel continues to say that some users are reporting a green fringe around certain on-screen elements like text. This happens when subpixels begin to essentially leak into places depending on their arrangement. While examining Samsung panel hasn't revealed anything out of place, the BOE panel has been highlighted for causing this. So basically, what's happening here is that people's Steam Decks are having sort of like this bleeding between the subpixels and the main pixels. This is
Right.
where we're going to have people commenting saying we're wrong. I'm learning on the job. Um, but it
Look,
only
we can't be experts about everything, right?
exactly,
Like
exactly. We can only try. Um, but this is only happening in the BOE displays.
Right.
Also, it's important to mention that it doesn't really affect like gaming so much. It's sort of like you have to be looking at like a static, you know, white image basically to be able to sort of see these things. But it is still something that can be a problem, and also like it says here that with OLED, panels can lose their vibrancy as time goes on. So
So
these
this
things
could get
can
worse.
this could get worse. It could change. Obviously we know about burning and things like that. I
Sure.
don't know how that sort of stuff affects
There's
it,
I
but
mean, and there's also the possibility, right, that, the report says here as it stands, right, some users are experiencing this, but who's to say that this won't become a more prevalent problem over time as the
yeah,
screens
of course,
degrade? We don't know, right?
of course,
It could be something that is disproportionately affecting some users, and if you're unlucky enough to be one of those people, that sucks, and
absolutely.
that's the end of it. But this is a thing that I mean, this could be, this screen's equivalent of like the Joy-Con drift, where it's like over the
Hmm.
years we're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is a systemic problem rather than an isolated incident.
Yes, I think that yeah, so it's only going to be a small amount of users that are going to be seeing these things. I've made a note here of saying that we need to remember that all consumer projects have a margin of error. Generally about 5%. But the
Right.
95% of people that have perfect decks aren't going onto Reddit and saying, "I've got something wrong with my Steam Deck." Which again is like you can look at the dead pixel issue, for example. You can go on Reddit and think, "Oh my god, all of these Steam Decks have got dead pixels. That's really awful." But no, it's just the sort of number of people. And let's say they sell 1,000,000 Steam Decks over the course of however long. 5% of that. I did know the maths earlier. I've forgotten it now, but it's such a tiny number. It's just the people that are
Yeah.
talking the loudest about it are those
It's
people.
like you said, right? There's always going to be a vocal minority of people who are dissatisfied,
Mhm.
right? Because if you're one of the folks who are, and this happens with any product, right? You see it on like, I don't know, like reviews on like Target or Amazon or something, where it's like someone's at 1 star, it didn't show up with all the pieces, right? And it's like
Yeah,
that
exactly.
sucks for you, but how likely is that to happen to any person who buys this product? Probably
Yeah.
not very likely. But if you're one of that 5%, it's gonna leave a sour taste in your mouth, and you're gonna wanna go to a place like Reddit or whatever and
Yeah.
commiserate with
Sort of
folks and see whether or
air
not you're the only one
grievances
dealing with
or
this, you
yeah, I
know?
think some people like to warn, some people like to moan. There's all sorts of reasons. But yeah, so the general gist of this is that there are people who think that the BOE displays are worst performing, or that they're sort of worst displays, or that they're the ones that are causing problems. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the Steam Decks that seem to have these BOE displays are the limited edition 1 terabyte OLED
Mhm.
device. We'll get onto why that could be a bit later on, where I've sort of done some theorizing down there. Um, but yeah, it does seem like people are getting their decks, and you can check using a console command, which I'm going to get Pete to put in the show notes. A link to the Reddit thing thread where you can get the command, put it in. I've checked mine because I did get an OLED just to woo. Did finally
That's
get
right,
one
he did it.
after
He's in one of us.
weeks of arguing with myself. I did eventually. So now we all have one. But yeah, so
Did you
me and
do it while
Steve.
you were on the stag? Were you drunk?
No,
And
no, no.
so
I
you came
tried.
back with a
I did
clear head
try.
and bought it.
No, no, because I did try. It didn't happen. It didn't work. And then I said to Kat, I was like, "Oh, just watch this." Sorry, I said to my girlfriend, "Oh, I've just watched a video about the OLED. It seems really cool. Like, it'd be quite nice to have one." She was like, well, why don't you just get yourself one? And like, I hadn't even finished that sentence, and I'd already gone through and bought it. So,
Okay.
yeah, I was like,
Just
well, now you said that, I
needed
obviously have to.
needed the tiniest,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
she
just a
just
little
she
prod.
cracked the window and you jumped through it.
Head first. But so yeah, so me and Steve both have our OLEDs, and we both have Samsung displays. Pete, you have a limited edition, and I assume you have a BOE display, right?
I do. Yeah.
Cool.
I did go and check it out, and I am one of the lucky folks. I don't have any dead pixels.
Mhm.
My uh, you know, eye test last week where I was like, I'm trying to stare at it. Maybe I see it at this angle. I don't know. No, I'm good. So I'm one of the
Yeah.
lucky folks.
As a limited edition sort of buyer, we know that you had your struggles. You finally got one. You were so elated. You burst the eardrums of every listener when you finally got through to that. How do you feel knowing that your special edition, very limited, not very limited, they only really sold out earlier this week, but still the device that's supposed to be the special, the best one cut above everything else, that seems to be the one that has the sort of quote unquote worst display because just because of for reasons we'll get into later, but still, like, how do you feel about that? That while me and Steve have our like basic bitch normie, what 512 gigabyte editions, I assume that's what Steve's got. That you've got, you sort of been stuck with something that is potentially inferior. Like, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I when I first saw this story, I was initially like, "Oh no!" Like of course, right? Of course, I went out of my way to get this thing, and then there's going to be some problem with it or whatever. And once I ran the screen test and was like, "Okay, like I seem to be okay," right? Now it's kind of the waiting game, right? So it's like today, right? Like in the so I'm still in this, initial 2, 3 week window, right, of getting the thing, and I've had no problems with it, then
Hmm.
it's, fine, right? Because, I think the differences that seem to be there, um, you know, are fairly limited in their scope, right? Like you said, right? It's if you have this problem and you're in this specific circumstance, it's going to be pretty noticeable. And otherwise, it's not an issue. So it's like, okay, since I'm not part of that 5% being affected by this problem, ostensibly, there doesn't seem to be much difference, right, between the experience that you and I are having now. I think the question is in 6 months, in a year from now,
Yeah.
is there degradation of these screens in particular that leads to these problems? Am I going to be reporting dead pixels in a couple months or something like that? And I think at that point, my feelings on it are going to be really tied to how Valve handles the situation,
Of course, yeah.
because I think if it is just kind of like, hey, it is what it is, right? Like this ended up being a problem and it affects 100% of users at some point or, 60 or, enough that they need to do something about it, right? Um, and I'm able to get it fixed. Like, yeah, I mean, that will certainly be a massive inconvenience and a frustration, but
Mhm.
um, something that, like you said, right, there's a margin of error with every product. So it's like, as long as they make right by the consumers who have been negatively impacted, I think it's at worst an inconvenience. And, that how much you're bothered by that is, I think, going to depend on how impacted you were by it and how much of an effort it took for you to get it fixed. Right. Whereas if, their kind of party line is, hey, like stuff has a 5% fail rate. And if you're one of those people, like you're SOL, I think that that is not a great look, and I think that that
Yeah.
is definitely something that
Well,
if I was one of those people, I would be very upset, right?
I feel like the RMA system of, you have a year or, 40 goods, yada yada, that is specifically meant for those 5% of people that have those problems. So I
Right.
feel like that's not going to be the issue there. And I do feel like this is a problem that maybe Valve had their hand forced a little bit in this situation, or what actually I think is going to be the case, and we'll quickly move on to the next bit. Is I actually have a theory that this isn't like a Valve has specifically chosen this for this and this for that. It seems like originally every Steam Deck OLED was supposed to have a BOE screen. Um, it seems like BOE was the chosen partner for the OLED. Let's move into this, and
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
explain why.
Talk to me about this because this is
So
something
this,
where I've heard about the pixels, right? I
Mhm.
knew about this issue. This is news to me. So tell me what's going on here with Samsung and BOE.
So Samsung is suing BOE basically. Essentially, this came to my knowledge, you know, this week when this whole thing was coming out, and I originally thought that it was, I was like, wow, like they must have really been upset by the Steam Deck. I didn't quite really understand what's going on, and I was hoping Steve would explain it to me, but I then had to look it up myself.
But I had to do it
I
myself.
had to do it myself. Sometimes you just got to do it yourself, haven't you? So it turns out actually this lawsuit was actually filed back in June by Samsung, who had claimed that BOE had infringed on its patents for OLED display components and modules. Basically, they were cloning the technology that they developed for OLED and releasing essentially cloned products. I think that um, some of the devices, for example, that they worked on, Samsung worked on like the Apple Watch OLED displays, the iPhone OLED displays, and BOE were essentially sort of cloning those things and doing things with it.
And
So,
selling them for in cheaper
and
technology, I would
yeah,
imagine.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, undercutting the price quite a lot. It's worth mentioning that BOE used to provide all of um, the displays for the LCD deck. So the original LCD deck
Okay.
were all BOE displays. Every single one of them was a BOE display. There was, there weren't really many issues with that at all. So it's not like BOE are somehow inferior displays.
Just seems to be an
The
issue with this specific OLED.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Now, the court trial isn't due actually to start until January 2024. But the fact that it sort of started in June and it was not going on until 2024, like, how has that affected the Steam Deck? Why are Steam Deck users so affected? So it seems like Samsung and BOE were both in consideration to supply OLED panels to Valve. As we already know, BOE already provided them, the LCD model, so it's a good chance that BOE was going to continue to do it. But part of Samsung's lawsuit has stopped BOE or stopped American companies from selling products that include these cloned BOE screens. Or they've sort of basically put a freeze on BOE selling these products that have these cloned screens. I don't know if it's
Yeah,
just in
that makes
American
sense.
territories, but yeah, it seems like because of the ongoing
Yeah.
lawsuit, they've stopped being able to do them.
Is that a stipulation of the lawsuit, or is that okay?
That
Because
Samsung has basically sort of said like, oh,
okay,
they need to stop selling these until we get this sorted out. They're not allowed to sell these, or American companies aren't allowed to do this, or
okay.
there's been some until it's all sorted out, that's the case, right?
That's interesting
S
because I was gonna say I wonder if it's that Samsung's suit forces them to do that, or if BOE has made the decision to suspend business because if they're found to
Oh,
be
no, 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 no.
because think about it, if they're found to be guilty, right, how much they're charged is gonna be proportional to the amount of business that they do.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
it's
I mean,
like
it could
think
be a bit of both. Could be a
yeah,
bit of both. It
right?
could be
Like,
Samsung
okay,
going, "Stop doing it here," and BOE have gone, "Well, let's just stop doing it everywhere." But,
maybe, yeah.
yeah, so my theory here is that, OLED's been in development for some time. I assume that they'd started putting these things together before June, before this lawsuit first came in. So they were probably somewhat of the way into production. If they were working on the limited edition devices first, sort of like your one, and they had this stack of BOE screens, there is a good chance that the lawsuit comes in, they have to stop making them. Valve has to get these screens, and who makes these screens? Samsung do. So I think Samsung has come in and said, "Look, we'll fulfill the rest of this for you," because there's nowhere else really for them to go. Maybe sort of
Yeah,
forcing Valve's hand a little bit to go with Samsung, which is why all of the limited editions seem to have these BOE displays, and why then it's a bit more pot luck as you get in towards the things, the standard ones, and why a lot of the standard ones seem to just be all Samsung.
it makes sense when you think about it too, right? Because Valve did say ahead of time that they had created the entire run of the limited editions
Mhm,
in advance, right? So they were probably just printed earlier, like maybe
mhm,
earlier this year before the lawsuit,
yeah.
happened or before it was, before business was actively halted, right?
Yes,
And
yeah, that seems to be the
I
case. I
guess it'll
reckon
be
if
interesting to see how it plays out because you got to
Mhm,
imagine if BOE is found to not be in violation and they're able to move forward, that will probably go back to working with them since they're probably cheaper, right? But
yes, yeah, yeah. I think at least until this court case is over, and if I know court cases, this is gonna be a little while.
yeah, it'll probably be at least a
Um
year, right?
Yeah, so I think sort of any Steam Deck bought from sort of now onwards, OLED specifically, you're probably gonna be getting Samsung screens, um, And yeah, so I feel like this is going to be like an early adopter's curse. Like people that got the limited edition or adopted early
Yep.
are going to have the BOE displays. But that's not because Valve had cheaped out, or it's not because BOE were making intentionally inferior products. It could just be that there's a problem with that specific line, and because of reasons that are out of everyone's control except Samsung's, that they're not making that, providing that screen anymore. So, I think it's just like a series of coincidences, or like, it's just a timing thing, really. I'm sure Steve's probably listening to this back, not that he ever does, screaming, "No, that's wrong. You've missed this key thing. You've missed this key
I
bit of
think I
evidence."
think you I
But
think you did fine. It sounds like you
that's
got it.
my deduction of it, right?
I think you nailed it, you know?
I
And
think I
if you
did
didn't,
too.
everybody comment Max in the comments,
I would
tell
love to
them.
know what I've missed or what I've got wrong here, because I am very interested. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I think so. Now I think we have a good idea of what this problem is, and it could even be that, if there are huge problems with the BOE ones, it's simply a case of RMA. That I know that the OLED model is easier to replace the screen. You don't have to take the whole thing apart.
That's true.
So they're probably more likely to be able to replace them rather than just send out straight out replacements. And especially considering it's a limited edition, it's going to be harder to get
They'll have
replacements. So
to.
they're going to be, yeah,
Yeah.
they'll have to. So you could even be that, you end up getting Samsung displays anyway. Um,
Yeah.
but it could also all sort out, and the lawsuit gets thrown out or sorted or whatever, and then everyone gets BOE, and maybe those of us that have the Samsung ones now are just lucky. Who knows? We don't know. It's impossible to tell with these sorts of things, especially when there's court cases involved. But yeah, there we go. I hope that's been informative to everyone.
I learned some
And
stuff, Max. Thank you so much.
yeah,
Look
good.
at you.
There
You
we
did it,
go.
buddy. Great job, everybody.
I
Round of
tried.
applause. Round of applause for our boy Max.
Why don't you show your homework to us now, Pete?
Great. Okay. So in my essay, I'm going to talk about how Valve boss Gabe Newell has been ordered to appear in U.S. court as part of an ongoing antitrust lawsuit filed by One Wolf Fire Games.
Before we get to that, do you have any housekeeping to do? Because I realised I didn't. I realised that I've not given you space for housekeeping.
You know what,
Do we?
Max? You know what, Max? I'll take the opportunity. We're going to talk
Go
about
on.
that story in just a second. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Steam Deck podcast is by our Patreon producers for the month of December. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Asobi, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to go above and beyond and show your support just like they did, you can head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to our Patreon, our Discord if you want to keep the conversation rolling between episodes, or you could write in and be a part of the Steam docket and get your thoughts, questions, and opinions read on the air. However you choose to get involved or show your support, thank you for being a member of the Flip Screen Games community and tuning in for this week's episode of the Steam Deck podcast. All right, let's get into my essay here, Max, because the story has broken about late last week, right? That one Gabe Newell will be forced to now give an in-person deposition in the United States as part of an ongoing antitrust lawsuit against Valve that has been started by the indie developer Wolfire Games, who is, I would say, probably best known for their 3D action adventure fighter Overgrowth.
Mm-hmm.
Game you and I were both familiar with. It's a game that I remember being hot kind of in the early days of early access on Steam, you know?
It was, yeah, it was the real like horny rabbit game. Like those rabbits were
It's like
like
they were like
humanoid.
rabbit heads with very humanoid bodies, and it was this
Yeah.
very like very, very technical action
Yeah,
like
yeah. It
fighter.
was really like kangaroo-y. They would sort of jump around and
Yeah,
like
and you
you did a lot of
controlled like
2
every
foot.
limb with a different
Mhm.
button. So it
Yeah, it
was
was
very, very
really,
interesting.
really cool.
Yeah, it was a fun game for
Yeah,
sure.
it really was.
So the kind of the newest wrinkle here, right, is that Gabe is going to be forced to come to the United States. If you don't know, Gabe has been living in New Zealand for the last several years, and Wolfire had filed an order earlier this month to basically try to force Gabe to come in person because he has he had made a request to have a remote deposition because he is claiming that there's an issue of a health concern for him, right? That he has said in his own word that he has structured his life to minimize exposure to possible COVID-19 transmission. And Wolfire has basically pushed back on that and said that there's insubstantial evidence to suggest that he is at particulated risk of serious illness and that they want him there in person because he is, quote, uniquely positioned to testify on all aspects of Valve's business strategy. And the company wants to, quote, adequately assess Newell's credibility.
They're going in. They're going hard.
Yeah, yeah, they are. And I think, I think there has definitely been I've seen reactions from folks who have kind of been like, "Why are they going this hard?" And this seems like a little overly aggressive and to
Mhm.
dismiss his health concerns, are is like not a cool thing to do. And let me cook for a little bit, right? Because we're gonna hear from Wolfire themselves why they feel that the action that they've taken is not only warranted, but something that they feel is important that they do, not just for themselves, but for the benefit of all indie developers that are publishing on Steam. So, um, you know, we'll we'll hear their side in a second here first, all right? But to give you a little more background on the case, just to give you an idea of what's happening here and the why of it, the case was originally filed, right? They brought this lawsuit against Valve initially back in November of 2021. And I think the reason you probably haven't heard about it before now is that it was initially dismissed, right? They were able to refile with a new complaint in May of 2022. And as you alluded to earlier, Max, right? Court cases take a long time to get moving. So the fact that we're, almost a year later and we're finally getting some motion there is not particularly surprising, a
Yeah.
little par for the course for this sort of thing. But the, kind of baseline, right? Overall claim of the case is that Wolfire believes that Valve is using their, and to use their word, dominance in the PC games publishing market, right? Being the de facto place that people buy games on PC, is something that they have used to take what they characterize as a, quote, extraordinarily high cut from nearly every sale that passes through its store, which exploits publishers and consumers alike. So that is them referring to the 30% cut that Valve takes from every
Mhm.
sale on the platform. So, you
Is that
know,
extraordinarily high, or is that not the industry standard?
I mean, I think it is interesting because when you compare it to obviously their most direct competitor at Epic, it's quite a bit higher, right? And
Okay.
say what you will about the Epic Game Store. I know that there are a lot of Steam fans that do not like the Epic Game Store, and perhaps even rightly so, right? I know that it obviously doesn't perform as well as the Steam launcher. It has a lot of problems. Fair enough, right? That said, Epic takes a 12% cut on game
Okay.
sales, right? So significantly less.
I mean, I guess Epic has the benefit of not taking not a benefit, but they don't take a profit from the Epic Game Store. They haven't made a profit from the Epic Game Store, and I guess
Right.
maybe they've got their fingers in so many pies, whereas Valve just does Steam now, really, other than the Steam Deck, which is a relatively new venture. They don't really make games that much anymore. They own Steam. They do Steam. You might be right. They could cut down to 12% and still make money. I don't really know the specifics of it, but um,
So
Epic, makes most of their money on the engine, right? Unreal Engine.
sure, yeah, well, and Fortnite, right? And the games that
Yes.
they put out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I do also want to give a little bit more context because you did ask like what what the other storefronts percentages are, right? And on console, 30 does seem to be the standard, right? Across
Okay.
PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox. Apparently from Xbox's court documents that leaked, right? And there
Oh,
was a
yeah.
million stories back there that came out of it. They did actually talk about reducing it, but it's not something that they've ever actually done.
Mhm.
So, I think there's an argument to be made, right? And again, I want to fairly present both sides here. There's an argument to be made that what Valve's doing is not out, it's par for the course, right? This is the cut that storefronts take, and this is what developers have come to expect, right? So I think where it gets interesting is back in 2021, when Wolfire was preparing their initial lawsuit, right? They posted this in May, right? So of 2021. They talked about another angle to what Valve does that they think is inappropriate and shows that they are leveraging their position as a market leader to try and corner the market and create a monopoly of sorts, right? And I would like to read the blog post. It's not very long. It's a couple short paragraphs, and I think it's worth hearing from Wolfire themselves, so that I'm not paraphrasing
We've
their.
all got time for learning. We've all got time for
We've all
learning
got
here.
time for learning. I like that, Max. Okay, so this is from David Rosen from Wolfire, so you know who's speaking. Dear gamers and game developers, I would like to explain why Wolfire Games is seeking to represent game developers in a class action lawsuit against Valve Corporation. I felt that I had no choice because I believe gamers and game developers are being harmed by Valve's conduct. While I am taking on significant personal risk, I am not doing this for personal gain. If there's any monetary recovery, it will be distributed to all developers and gamers in the class. I did not set out with the goal of suing Valve, but I have personally experienced the conduct described in the complaint. When new video game stores were opening that charged much lower commissions than Valve, like Epic, I decided that I would provide my game Overgrowth, the game we mentioned earlier, at a lower price to take advantage of the lower commission rates. I intended to write a blog post about the results. But when I asked Valve about this plan, they replied that they would remove Overgrowth from Steam if I allowed it to be sold at a lower price anywhere, even from my own website without Steam keys and without Steam's DRM. This would make it impossible for me or any game developer to determine whether or not Steam is earning their commission. I believe that other developers who charged lower prices on other stores have been contacted by Valve, telling them that their games will be removed from Steam if they do not raise their prices on competing stores. While nobody, excuse me, while talking to other developers about problems that they were having with Steam, they kept referring to it as a quote unquote monopoly and saying that there was nothing that we could do. I wondered, has anyone actually checked if Valve is obeying antitrust law? So I consulted with legal experts, which eventually culminated in the complaint. As the dominant platform, when developers list their games on multiple PC stores, the majority of their sales will come through Steam. I believe this makes most developers afraid that if they don't sell on Steam, they will lose the majority of their revenue. To those developers, avoiding Steam would add unacceptable risk to the already high risk of game development in general. I believe that most developers have little or no choice but to sell on Steam and do as they're told by Valve. I believe that businesses are free to do whatever they want within the law. However, once a company reaches a certain level of power over an entire market, the antitrust laws forbid those companies from distorting competition. I believe that Valve is taking away gamers' freedom to choose how much extra they are willing to pay to use their platform. I believe they are taking away from competing stores' freedom to compete by taking advantage of their lower commission rates. I believe that they are taking away developers' freedom to use different pricing models. In my opinion, this is part of why all competing stores have failed. The suit insists that Valve stop interfering with pricing on other stores and allow gamers and developers to make their own decisions. And that's why I joined the lawsuit. Sincerely, David Rosen.
My two-word response to that is fair fucks. Like I have no problem with any of what was said there. I think it was put forward in a really uh you know in a not in a way that didn't seem too emotive. It didn't seem like it was um using any sort of like exaggerated language or anything like that. I think that
Or that it feels like punitive. It's
mm,
like motivated by revenge or by
yeah.
anger, right? It's like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I I think you're right. I think he's laid out a fair case, and I think anybody who's not a fanboy should be able to look at that practice and acknowledge that if what David is claiming is happening to developers in the way that he's claiming, and we have no reason to believe otherwise, that's not cool, and it is predatory, and it is something that I think is probably under the purview of antitrust law, right? Because you shouldn't be able to leverage your status as the market leader to dictate how people sell their product on other
Yeah.
platforms, and to say that if you don't if you don't give us the best deal, we're gonna revoke your right to use our service, which is,
Yeah.
more or less the de facto way people play games, right? And I think, you know, I think that there is I think the one thing I'd push back on is that the argument that, the reason that or that it's one of the primary reasons that competitor stores haven't been able to um establish themselves is because of Valve's interference. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's not a factor, but I think that many of the people in our argument or in our audience, excuse me, would be quick to supply the argument that the reason that people don't like to use the Epic Game Store is that it's not as good as an experience as using the Steam Store, right?
Yes.
Its
Yeah.
launcher is not as efficient. It crashes. It takes longer to load games. It has a lot of problems, right? And I think anybody, and again, right, anybody who's not a fanboy, anybody who wants to just try to look at the facts as they are, can acknowledge that that's the case, right? And
Mhm.
that I think a lot of people take advantage of the Epic Store because you can get free games, right?
Yeah.
Or you can play, games that get exclusive releases over there on a timed window. And
Yeah.
that's, the vast majority of the reason people are going over there and playing games.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Or if the game happens to be that much cheaper over there, for example, I'll sort of like during a sale, you can pick it up on not that it happens very often, but sometimes there are games that it's like, oh, this is having a really good sale on Epic or
Maybe that's
three
why,
ninety
right?
nine.
Not that that
Yeah,
happens
yeah.
very often. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I think it's interesting. I've always said that the sort of main reason I like playing PC games is freedom. It is, I can if I want to treat my PC like a console, I can treat it like a console. If I want to buy games from this store, that store, find the best deal, I can. You don't have that on console. You don't have the option of going elsewhere and getting the codes or how being able to buy it from somewhere else. And I think it's interesting that PC gamers are somehow so against something as not going somewhere that isn't Steam. Everything has to be in Steam. Everything has to be owned by Steam. And while I admit that I do like having things in Steam because now there is hardware that acts that way, the reason I don't uh, begrudge having to use the PlayStation Store is because PlayStation owns that store. If I want to play a PlayStation game, I have to use that. And on the Steam Deck, I do think that you have the benefit now of Valve owns the software, Valve owns the hardware. They work really well together, and that's good. But I think for overall PC stuff, you shouldn't feel locked in, or you shouldn't want to be locked into just one. And
yeah, and I mean,
yeah,
this shows the way that that's bad for the industry, right?
hmm
Because I think, the argument with PlayStation, um, I think is a salient one, right? Where it's like, yeah, it makes sense that that's the problem, but there is also the solution that if you like many indie developers feel like because there's literally there was that whole conversation that just happened not that long ago, right? And PlayStation just has a lawsuit of their own going on over this, right? Over the way that their store practices with promoting independent games. If you feel like PlayStation's offering you a raw deal, you can go over to Xbox, you can go over to
hmm
Nintendo, and you can go somewhere else and play ball there. But like, if you're an independent studio and your plan is to publish on PC, I think that what David's saying is right. You don't really have the option to not release your
exactly.
game on Steam unless you get paid by Epic, I guess, to do an exclusivity window. But
hmm
then you are severely limiting the number of people that are going to play your game. And if you're a small, like a really small, self-published studio that doesn't have like a massive, hyped hit on their hands,
Yeah,
Epic's not going to come over and pay you to put your game on their platform and not release it on Steam, right?
yeah,
So with that in mind, yeah, I think it's interesting because I think with PlayStation, with Xbox, with Nintendo, right? Like it is easy to point at Steam and be like, why is this different? And I think to your point, it is that PC is supposed to be more open than that, and it is supposed to be a platform where you can make those decisions. Consumers have the freedom to make decisions that are best for them. And, ideally, publishers, developers should have the ability to make the decisions that are best for them. And to have Valve, because they make a great product, right? And they, for a long time, were the only game in town because they saw the value that PC gaming had and they more or less saved it, right? Like you can't understate how important Steam was
Oh,
to
absolutely.
reviving PC gaming, right? And I think we all respect that, and I think the fact that they have the best storefront is enough for them to maintain their space as the market leader. But the fact that they don't even want to entertain the idea of there being a Pepsi to their Coke
Yeah.
is, that is aggressive in a way that I think is harmful to developers and to consumers. And I think that, there's an argument to be made here that if that's what they're doing, there probably needs to be some pressure from governments to make them stop.
Yeah. It's one thing to put certain things in place that affect your competition, right? In some ways, if another company's trying to come and create a store, it's one thing to prevent that, but it's another thing to affect. When it starts to affect the indie developers, people that support and rely on you as to reach other customers through your platform. I think that's a problem there, and yeah, I do. I mean, I'm curious about how this goes, and I do think that it's good that while I understand the health concerns, it is good that maybe that they're sticking to their guns and saying no, he should be in person here to discuss this with us. For one, it gives us lots of juicy, nice stuff to talk about, but just to sort of like maybe hear his side properly or hear Valve's side properly. Not to try and side with the big guy here, but it would be good to sort of hear what their actual response is going to be to this. Mm,
Yeah, yeah, because I think it's interesting because I think this is gonna be probably a rare glimpse behind the curtain for a company that we don't know a ton about the inner workings because they are so different and experimental, and I think because of that, we often give them this kind of, like, little guy street cred without really considering that they are a massive and very powerful company.
yes.
And, that's, I think, deserved, right? Like, it is because they created the best product, in the market and dominated for forever, and they're still dominating. So, like, I think, there's something to be said for when you're on the top, right? Like wanting to make sure that you are keeping the folks nipping at your heels in check. But I think when you start using that power to exert it over these smaller developers that really don't have any response to you kind of strong arming them, that's when you're moving into the gross corporate territory, right? That Valve is supposed to be above, right? And we like to think that they're above. And, hopefully the response is a good one. Hopefully it is maybe it is a I don't know. I don't know how you respond to this in a way that isn't just owning what you did and moving on
Hmm.
from it. And I have a hard time believing that that's what they're going to do. Because that's not what corporations do when they're
No,
caught with their
exactly.
pants down, right? They try and get
Yeah.
away with it. So, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens, but, definitely a story we will keep you posted on as it develops,
Yes.
right? It'll probably be a couple months at this point before we.
Really thought we were free of lawsuit talk. After now that Xbox finally owns Activision, I thought,
Now it's
cool, we
come to
never
this
have to.
show.
Now it's come to the show I like to do. No,
I
I'm
can't get
joking. I'm
away from it.
joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. But yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll just have to. We'll wait and see. I feel like I did a lot of. I will have to wait and see in on flip screen games during that era, and now I'm going to have to do it a lot on the Steam Deck podcast. Um, get used to that every week, but we'll wait and see to see whether I do it every week.
Now comes the barrage of Steam Deck 2 when questions.
Yeah.
Gonna enter that era on
Bloody
this show
hell.
too.
Yeah. Steam Deck Pro when? Steam Deck Pro?
All right, Max. So speaking of impressions, we've got a couple minutes left on the show here. Why don't you give the kids a breakdown of your initial OLED impressions? You've had the thing for about a week, right? How you
No,
getting on with it?
I've had the thing for 12 hours.
Oh God. Okay, so a
Yeah,
lot less
yeah,
time than
it arrived today. So these are gonna be off the top things of stuff that I've noticed in the last 12 hours. I have used it quite a lot, but I've also been, you know, working and doing other things. So I did write a little list down. It's noticeably lighter, which at the beginning I was like, oh, is it? is this going to be less robust? Is it going to be less quality? But no, it's going to be absolutely fine. It's just lighter. You get that weird thing in your head of like heavy means quality, and that's why they just stick big chunks of metal inside certain things. The touchscreen was immediately a huge improvement when I was using the keyboard and using desktop mode. I was like, wow, this is like using an actual touchscreen, and I'm not like using like an old LG smartphone where you physically have to depress the plastic screen with a stylus to get it to work. Like it's working properly. Also, I feel like there's new haptics, but maybe I just turned off the haptics on the old Steam Deck because I was typing and I was like, this feels different, and the thumb trackpads feel different as well. I don't know if that's new or if that's in.
They are new. I
Okay, good.
remember Steve pointed them out, and I was like, "Oh, really?" And then I started using them, and I was like, "Oh my god." Like, something I
Mm.
noticed is, like, they're more sensitive, and, like,
Mhm.
I think like, I don't even know how to, like, describe this, but, like, the hot zone for it is the entire like, bit of it. Like, I
Mhm.
noticed that even on the very, very edge of the, pad, you can still use your digit and get that fine motor control,
Mhm.
whereas Steve and I commented that, like, on the old one, it would kinda feel like you'd be doing, like, one big swipe, and then you'd stop, and then do another big
Yeah, yeah,
swipe,
yeah.
and that was what you had to do to kinda get it across the screen, whereas now, because you can kinda roll your whole thumb, you can
Mhm.
actually get a lot more fine motor control out of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Seems
definitely
way
different.
better.
Definitely.
Um, I'm quite interested. I was using the Checky for Deck, and they've sort of got the haptics running through the Steam Deck now. I'm curious whether they will feel any better with these new haptics, but I doubt it. It's probably just a rumble. Anyway, file transfer. I wanted to sort of move everything over from my old deck to my new deck, and I was looking up all sorts of different ways to do it, software wise. And eventually, I ended up just clearing some games off my SD card, putting my entire home folder on the SD card, and then just moving it over. Took about 2 hours, I'd say. But I ended up having to reinstall EmuDeck as all of the flat packs for certain things, like all the RetroArch stuff, all of the DS, 3DS, all that sort of stuff. Any emulator that was a flat pack just didn't work, so I ended up just resetting and re-downloading EmuDeck. Works fine now. The screen's incredible. I, you know, day one of the OG LCD Steam Deck, I was like, the one thing I would change is the screen. I wish it was I'd had the OLED deck for about a year by that point. Um, and I just, didn't want to have to sort of go back to it. And for that reason, the Switch has been my uh, indie system of choice for you know since it came out, really, because it's the form factor and the screen. And now I feel like because of the 90 hertz screen, because it's still an OLED, and because um, you know you can guarantee performance on the Steam Deck versus on the Switch as well with some of these games. I feel like the OLED
Sure.
Steam Deck is now going to be my sort of de facto go-to indie device, which is good, because I love using this device. What next? The faster download speeds are great. I downloaded Ori and the Blind Forest because it's one of the only games I had across the Steam Deck and the Switch. Um, and by the time I'd got Ori downloaded on my new deck, it was only 50% of the way through on the original deck, and probably like less so on the Switch. So
Dude,
the
I straight up cannot believe how much faster it is.
yeah, wild.
Like, I think I mentioned it last week, but, like, with Baldur's Gate 3, like, the first time I downloaded it, it took, like, a few hours, and, like, this
Mhm.
time I, started downloading it, and I put it down and was like, "I'll start downloading it so I can play it tomorrow," and then it was, like, I don't know, maybe, one episode of TV or whatever goes by, and, like, I hear the "doo," and I'm like, "Oh, what? It's already done?
Yeah,
Are you kidding me?" Like, it's
it's really, really
a
impressive.
fraction of the amount of time.
And I do wish that they had, you know, download in the background now so that I could sort of, I wish that was something they could do.
Yeah,
But I've managed to mitigate that by docking it with the TV off so that the screen's still off, and it's doing the downloading, and then when it gets to a
yeah,
certain point, it just turns it off
it's
anyway.
a good
So
idea.
that's fine for now, but it just means I can't do it remotely, which is the big sort of thing for me. I want to be able to go, oh, do you know what I fancy when I get home is playing this, set it to install through the app, and then come home to the game installed like you can with the Switch. But when a new game comes out, for example. But anyway, a couple of little issues. One issue, I've got one issue. And it's not it's an issue because I was very excited when I saw on Reddit that you can now turn on the Steam Deck OLED using an Xbox controller, or any sort of Bluetooth controller. Apparently, won't work with me. I've seen reports of people on Reddit saying, "Oh, it's too sensitive. My I open my AirPod case and my Steam Deck turns on across the room, or
It's
I'll
hilarious.
lock my mouse and my Steam Deck will turn on, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, luckily for me, it's just going to be I have to turn the controller on. Cannot get it to work, whether it's plugged in, not plugged in, anything. Holding down the button on the Xbox just makes the Xbox
Huh.
controller flash, and nothing else happens. My
I've had that problem with Xbox controllers in general, like, where, like, I just can't like, sometimes I haven't tried it with my OLED deck. With my
mm,
original deck, I would connect it, and it would like, the deck would recognize the controller, and then when I would try to connect it, it would flash, and it would just, like, disconnect,
oh,
and
okay, so I've
but,
never
like,
had that issue.
PlayStation controllers, Nintendo controllers work.
Maybe I'll try other controllers for this, but the Xbox controller is the one that I use, so I'd like that to be able to work because I generally, at the moment, I'm using my Steam Deck a lot as a console. I come home,
Yeah,
I turn it on, I turn my PC on, and I'll, you know, sort it out that way. I'll play games through Moonlight, or play games on the TV or whatever. And it'd be nice just to take that one extra step. It's obviously minor, but it would be
yeah.
nice. The new case
You
has no
might
little.
try a PlayStation controller, and then maybe do you have more than one Xbox controller?
I've just got the one series controller. I don't own an Xbox, so it's my one PC controller that I
Okay, so
use.
you
So
okay, because that was gonna be my next question is, like, I wonder if maybe it's having trouble because it's sunk to your PC and your Steam Deck.
the
I
PC is
noticed it
it's
didn't that was a
it's
problem.
no, on the PC. I've got the dongle because my PC doesn't have Bluetooth, so it's the official Xbox dongle. I
Gotcha.
then double click the button, swap it over to Bluetooth. When the Steam Deck's on, connects absolutely fine. I just can't turn the Steam Deck on with it. Also, I bought a new pair of headphones. We spoke last week about set of headphones I wanted to get. No, earlier this week. Whenever I got them, great. They just can't turn the system on. Fine, not a huge problem. It'll just be nice. What I might try doing is I realize I'm on stable now, not preview or beta.
Oh, yeah, maybe do that.
So might do that, but
Give that a go.
I'm pretty sure it was in stable. There's no lifting tab in the new case, which was weird. The new case just feels a little bit odd. Like it's the same, but the white zip tabs and the lack of a little thing that you lift up threw me off. But fine, whatever. And the last thing, I really need the Moonlight Linux guys to hurry up and add HDR support to the flat pack for it, because I'm gonna be doing a lot of streaming, and it'd be nice to be able to sort of stream games in HDR directly to the thing or through the TV or anything like that. I noticed in Resident Evil 4, like, when you get you're in a very dark room, but there's like lines of black, like where it's different
Yes.
shades.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing a lot of that. So yeah, I was hoping that the HDR be enabled. Is in the Windows version, so I could try running it through Lutris or Bottles or whatever the hell, one of those things. But I just like the simplicity of downloading the flat pack and updating it from there. So fingers crossed with the OLED deck, it's a feature they prioritize now going forward. Uh,
It'll probably come sooner than later, right? I mean, the fact that
yeah,
the
yeah,
OLED
yeah.
deck is kind of the new standard, you gotta imagine that that's
You'd
eventually
hope
something
so, yeah.
they're gonna work
So yeah,
on.
that's my impressions of the OLED deck. I love it, and I'm really looking forward to playing more games with it. Playing games natively, playing games streaming, sort of, really, really looking forward to that. I think I still really would like them to do a Steam controller too. I actually had a dream last night because I was excited about this arriving, that they'd made a Steam controller too, but instead of it being like
A
a
dream.
smaller Steam, it was a full Steam Deck, and it was like the Wii U gamepad. So
Yeah.
it was just a second Steam Deck that you bought that you used to control your Steam Deck,
The
which
PlayStation
actually
Portal for your
yeah,
Steam
yeah,
Deck.
yeah, exactly. But now I think about it, imagine DS emulation where you've got like the massive screen on your TV and the touchscreen,
Could be
or
good.
just Wii U emulation. Yeah,
Could
that
be
should be.
good.
They should make a Steam Deck portal or a Valve portal. Hello, hello us. Um, for that. So yes, that's Steam Deck OLED. Tack this onto last week's episode if you really want to hear all three of our impressions separately. But there you go.
You got it. We nailed it. You had to come in and bring up the rear, you know?
Always do,
You always do.
Especially when Steve's on.
All right, guys. Thank you guys for joining us here in another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. Remember, if you want to get involved with the community, if you want to go and show your support, check out our sister shows, or just come and get your thoughts right on the air in the show by writing in or joining the Discord. You can do all that and much more by heading over to our website, flipscreen.games. Go over there, click on some stuff, show your support, however you choose to get involved. Thank you guys for joining us here in another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.
Ta-ra.
Hurrah, indeed.